Hello and welcome to our free masterclass to learn about how 3D technologies can be implemented in fashion businesses. I'm Girke, I'm the founder of VIA, and I will be guiding you through this topic. Here is what we will cover in this masterclass. We'll start by looking at what 3D looks like in other industries. So, here you can see images from different industries. There is actually two types of 3D in here. On the left, we can see sort of tangible 3D examples, so 3D printed items. And on the right side, we can see 3D visualizations. So, starting on the left, you have probably heard of 3D printed implants and how surgeons are practicing on 3D printed models of organs. So, that being said, 3D is quite common in medicine already. Then, next, we can see an Adidas shoe with a 3D printed sole. This has also started to get very popular recently, and you can notice a lot of 3D printed soles for shoes quite often. But today we're not talking about 3D in its sort of tangible form, but instead we will focus on 3D visuals. So on the right side, you can see an image taken from a car commercial. Actually, more than half of the car commercials that you see on TV is all CGI. That means computer generated. So here as well, the car is made with 3D graphics, and then there is some VFX used to create some effects. So we don't even notice how much 3D visuals are already used everywhere around us instead of like real videography and photography. And we're not talking about only car commercials, but also electronics, cosmetics, all kinds of products, really. And then lastly, architecture. Well, architects would simply sell air if they wouldn't have the possibility to create 3D visuals of the buildings. So for them as well, 3D is a common everyday tool already for more than 15 years. But now let's take a look at 3D in fashion. So what examples have we seen recently? The simplest way to use 3D visuals in fashion is simply as an alternative to technical drawings. As 2D flat drawings cannot really give an accurate understanding of the fit of the design and the drape of the fabric, 3D is obviously much more realistic and accurate. And because of that, we can prevent problems simply coming from interpretation. So next level from that is to include a mannequin or an avatar inside of the garment so that we can create more appealing images with different poses. And the next level from that is to create a hyper realistic avatar to wear the garments. Now, we're talking about virtual models like Shudu, for example. If you don't know her yet, then definitely go and check her Instagram out. She's doing some great collaborations with big brands. Fun fact in here is that the software used to create Shudu, as far as I know at least, is nothing fancy. So to create an avatar, Das 3D was used here, which is actually free software. And then the textures, like the skin and eyes, were edited in Photoshop. Also, the dress is simply created in Clo 3D. So actually, it's not too sort of utopian to create this kind of an avatar. It just takes time. Well, now with AI, maybe you don't even need that much time anymore either. So, but we also have a next level from that, and this is virtual influencers. Here you can see three examples. Lil Michaela is the most famous of them all, and she has her own whole life. She has boyfriends, breakups, music videos. She's even politically active. But to create that kind of a content, there is actually a whole a team behind it. And let's move even further than virtual influencers. Maybe you have seen the growing trend in CGI campaigns, like, for example, this Jacquemus ad, where their Bambino bags were effortlessly strolling around Paris streets. And, well, of course, we need to mention NFTs. I'd say they had their hype in 2021 and 2022, when brands could apparently make $6 million from the sales of, well, essentially images. But now, as the hype is over, we need to find more value in NFTs. And I do think actually NFTs will make their comeback, but might be in a bit of a different form, as maybe even attached to the real life products or related to some exclusive events. Anyway, brands are still trying to understand exactly how they can effectively use this technology, as it has actually really great potential. Also, we could see several virtual showrooms, as for example, Puma. It is still up and running, and you can visit their 3D space to check it out yourself. This is also something that, when used strategically, it can prove to be very effective. We will also talk about this a bit more later. Though, if we want things to be more exciting than virtual showrooms, then you could always create fashion designs for video games like Moschino and other luxury brands have done. So, Moschino already in 2019 collaborated with The Sims and created their stuff pack, but there have been so many similar collaborations after that as well. And lastly, why not have a digital only store? DressX, for example, sells only digital items, garments, never anything physical. You can try the designs on their app or via a AR filter, or send them a picture, and they will basically just Photoshop the design on your photo. Again, if you wonder if what is the value in that, really, I think we need to wait a bit longer for that. There is some value in that for influencers right now, sure, but they need constant content, right? But for this kind of an idea to become mainstream, I think, yeah, we still have to wait a bit. For a creator today, it is actually still a great opportunity. Now, before we start talking more in depth about 3D in product development and marketing, let's explain some terms. Here you can see some terms that have been prominent lately, and let's try to explain them in a sort of mathematical way, the easiest way possible. So first, let's see what is a metaverse platform. It consists of, firstly, 3D graphics, which are built on a blockchain technology, which includes crypto and might also include AI. You can notice that VR is actually only optional for a metaverse platform. That means, in order to access a metaverse platform, you don't really need VR glasses, as many might think. It is actually like a video game, and the access works the same way. And then AR. Again, we start with 3D graphics and use them as a filter through a phone camera. You can see a lot of AR filters in Instagram and Snapchat. They all either require a 3D model, or they have some 2D filter like makeup applied in a 3D environment. Anyway, it has to do with 3D, because our world is three-dimensional, so it has to match it in order to work. Now, virtual reality, for that we need, again, 3D graphics, but together with VR glasses, right? So, in order to create seamless experiences. A virtual showroom comes together when we apply 3D graphics on a website. So we basically build a 3D room on a website. Notice here also how different a metaverse platform and virtual showroom is. Metaverse is much more complex, as it is real time. You can basically go and meet your friends in there if you want to. Whereas a virtual showroom, there you're typically alone, so the data is not shared between users. That means it is much easier for your computer to process. That also means the quality of 3D models can be much higher in a virtual showroom than on a metaverse. So again, I will show you examples soon as well, so you understand a bit better. But before, I also wanted to clarify 3D printing. Um, Even though it's out of topic for us right now, but because usually whenever I say 3D, people instantly associate 3D printing to it for some reason. So let's clarify that too. For 3D printing, we also first need a 3D model, which then can be printed out with a special printer and, well, basically plastic. Of course, there are several materials available for printing, but plastic is the most common. Right. So, what was my goal with all these explanations? It was actually to show you how everything starts from 3D graphics, as you can see here. So, most of the innovative technologies today have to do with 3D. We are excluding AI though, as this is a very different technology and has a different logic. AI is a topic for a whole other masterclass. And so, in order not to confuse ourselves too much with it, let's keep it for another time. Um, but that means that if you're looking for a way to start in fashion tech, or if you want to be part of the digitalization happening in fashion currently, then the best way for you to start is simply to start learning 3D. And you don't need to be an expert in it. Even by taking a small course in 3D can help you understand the basics of how all these new technologies work. So, here is an example of Decentraland platform. So you can see this is a metaverse platform, right? So here you can see the quality of it, first of all, but you can also see the map. So you can go into various places. You can see where other users are. So if you go there, I would. Of course, I recommend you to check out the fashion street. So check out what's in there. And here you can see an example sort of virtual showroom. So Imperia has created a lot of pilot projects with very known brands. So you can also visit their website. They have a lot of example use cases out there. So you can really go into the showroom and see how it works, go through it, move through it. They have some games in there and so on. Also, you can see now the quality. So the quality is quite different from a metaverse platform. That is why usually for fashion, I would recommend, and I've also seen more of those virtual showrooms that they're more common. Now let's move on. What are these 3D graphics that I'm talking about? So let's first see how a 3D model comes together. First, we need to build the 3D model. Here is an example from Claw 3D where you can see how we're working simultaneously in 2D and 3D. We can see the flat patterns on the right side, and we're literally sewing the patterns together in 3D, as we do in real life. In some general 3D software like Blender, it is also called, this phase is also called sculpting, but there you don't have any 2D flats. You're literally building the 3D model sort of out of like clay, therefore also the word sculpting. But what does the 3D model consist of? You can see here on the right side the mesh that the fabric in 3D actually consists of. So all the tiny pieces in the mesh are actually forming the shape of the model as it should be. So all the wrinkles and the drape and so on. Then on top of the mesh, a texture is built with different maps. First, the texture map is basically a picture that is tiled around the 3D model. And on top of that, this texture map, we can also add color as it's done in here. Then, for the texture not to be totally flat, we do need a normal map, which is indicating then all the tiny dents and the bumps. There might be also additional maps included in the texture, opacity map, bump map, and so on. But these two are the most common ones. So here are the terms explained as well. I showed you what is sculpting, what is the mesh and texture map and the normal map. Now, Texturing is what we call when you are creating a texture with all different maps. It is usually more advanced. When you're working in Clo 3D, for example, you don't really need to worry about that, as there is an extensive library of fabrics that you can use already. But the most important term in 3D is, of course, rendering. So, rendering brings together all the data from the texture maps, from the lighting that is set, the image, angle, and so on. And in order to render a picture, it requires a lot of computing power. So, it is very heavy on your computer. Even rendering one single image might take 10 to 30 minutes. If a very complex texture is involved, then even much longer. So, actually, all depends on your computer. With very good graphics cards, it can be actually minutes instead. So there is quite a difference. So when you've rendered an image, this is what it can look like. So here it is. Here you can see two examples of simple renders. And you can see how the normal map has created the rib texture. So you can see the tiny bumps and dents. Also, as you can see, the light plays a crucial role in a render and can have significant effect on the image, as it does actually in real photography as well. So, in order to render a great image, it helps to know a bit about lighting as well. And when you also include an environment and an avatar to your render, it can look something like this. Here you can also see how the light is set so that it creates a nice little shadow of the avatar to the floor. Here, the whole background is also actually a 3D model. So, with that, it is able to create the effect of the lighting, and it also looks much more realistic. Here's a small list of known 3D software. Maybe you've heard of some industrial 3D software or the general type software. For example, Blender is a very powerful software and it is even free. It takes quite some time to understand how to use it, but once you do, you can create amazing things in there. Also, DAZ 3D I mentioned earlier, and it is also free. Then we also have Maya, ZBrush, and lots of other software. These are also most commonly used in gaming, but can be also, of course, utilized for fashion projects. And then we have lots of 3D software for fashion as well. I'd say the most common is Clo 3D, but we also have Style 3D, Browseware, Electra has 3D integrated now, and very many more. So here you can see an example of Blender. So you can also see the mesh in here, how it is used to build the whole 3D model. This is an example of DAZ 3D to create avatars and to pose them. And here we have an example of Clo 3D. So again, you can see how in Clo 3D we're working with the flat patterns and the 3D at the same time. Now let's get into it and let's see how 3D can be implemented in the product development processes in fashion. As I mentioned in the beginning, other industries have already been using 3D for a long time, and fashion has been the slowest to adopt this technology. Well, in fact, it is usually the slowest to adopt any new technology. So, even though the earliest tests in 3D in fashion already started in the 90s, why is 3D coming into fashion industry only now? Well, there are several reasons for it. First of all, garments are soft and dynamic, not like solid cars and houses. And simply, this fact makes it difficult to create realistic 3D model of a garment. Plus, in fashion, we have millions of fabrics that are behaving differently and adding an extra layer for complexity. So when for a solid object, you can simply imitate the looks of the texture. For a fabric, you also need to imitate its properties, its drape, and its flow. But for each fabric, even for each batch of produced fabric, these properties are different and varying in the tiniest of details. But as humans, we can recognize these tiny details and differences and can tell how a fabric might feel like just by its looks. And all of that is incredibly difficult to imitate digitally. And this means it remains the greatest limitation for 3D in fashion even today. And this is not it. We also have the wearer inside of the garment, right? So, again, for solid objects, we don't need to include an avatar. But for fashion garments, there needs to be someone wearing it. So, we also need to include a realistic avatar or a mannequin, which is a whole topic on its own, even more complications and limitations to it. But at least for now, we can simply hide the avatar and have 3D garments like this jacket in here. Also, recently, we are seeing actually more and more AI tools to help with that problem. But despite all that, all the big fashion brands you can think of that you can see in shopping malls and so on, they are using 3D in their product development already for years. And that shows how beneficial and effective this technology really is. So, how can 3D come into play in product development? Well, as I mentioned, it is mostly used as an alternative to physical samples. So, instead of sewing a real sample from these technical drawings, we can instead build a 3D sample, applying all the details from the sketch and seeing how it could look like in real life. But it is not this simple, so I will show you two main sort of scenarios how it can be used in current processes. So, first, a scenario is to use 3D closer to the design process. And that means there is a close collaboration between the designer and the 3D designer. So, the designer creates sketches, and the 3D designer builds the garment in 3D after that. It can be either created from scratch, but very often there are some earlier products used as a base and then modified to create a new design. So, when 3D is already implemented in the workflow, that means there is a library of 3D garments, then this process gets rather quick because creating modifications on an existing design is very fast in 3D. So, once the 3D is confirmed, then it can be taken further to be an additional input for the pattern maker. Usually, some main measurements are given together with the render, and this is how different interpretation errors are significantly reduced. After the pattern is created, a physical sample is still required, but at the same time, the 3D designer can already use the design for further use in websites, for example, so they can create higher quality renders already at the same time. Important things to note and consider here are firstly that a designer, a 3D designer, and pattern maker are all three different people. It can be, of course, that the designer uses 3D tools as well, so that comes together, but I'd emphasize in here that a 3D designer is definitely not a pattern maker. They might know pattern making, and this is great if they do. But when it comes to production, then definitely a pattern maker is a standalone professional. So all of these three are separate professions. Secondly, the 3D visuals that are used in product development are not meant for displaying to the customer usually. So, to create an appealing image for the customer facing areas such as websites and social media, a lot more things need to be considered, which requires additional skills, which is why typically also it is another profession once again. Often brands might even outsource this kind of content creation, but and they still provide their existing 3D designs from the product development for the content creators to sort of improve and take further. So, second scenario is to basically use the 3D design as a control step. It means that the workflow starts as usual with the designer sketch and then to the pattern maker. But once the pattern is created, then instead of sewing a sample together, it can be rather imported to a 3D software and sewn together digitally to detect any errors and problems. Typically, there are, of course, issues with the patterns, so it means that the designer needs to come into play again, trying to detect where the problems come from and what needs to be the final outcome exactly. So, compared actually to the first scenario, this is definitely not as lean. Though still, both scenarios can reduce the amount of physical samples that are necessary from usually 5 to 6 samples down to only 2 or maximum 3 samples. And again, once the pattern and the 3D is confirmed, then the 3D designer can take the design forward to be used in a website, for example, while the pattern goes into production. So these are the main two scenarios how 3D visuals can be used in product development. Now let's see what are the pros and cons of such practices. So first, simply because of the substantial cut in the amount of physical samples, basically half, right? We can observe several effects. Firstly, because sewing physical samples takes considerable time, using 3D makes the whole process much faster. Some brands have actually observed the time to market to be increased from usual 18 months down to only 6 months when 3D is involved. And then, of course, we are creating less waste by sewing less samples, which in turn cuts the cost for the business. What I mentioned before was the communication as well. So, simply by providing a more realistic and detailed visuals in 3D, we can solve a lot of communication problems in the design process that simply come from interpretation differences. Then, as the 3D designs are digital and contain a lot of information, we can utilize it further to optimize business processes and gain measurable insight by tracking materials and processes along the supply chain. So that every detail from fabric composition down to construction techniques can be documented and monitored. And this is an important factor for managing compliance with regulations and standards. So, all in all, 3D in product development acts as a crucial cornerstone for the digital transformation of the fashion industry. But it cannot all be so rosy and good, so let's see some limitations and obstacles as well. First, is the limitation I mentioned before, which is from the fabric itself. Digital can never really replace physical touch. Plus, it is still currently complicated to match the digital fabric to the physical one 100%. The main problems, though, these lie in regards to the people. So it can be problematic to train the staff, first of all. The staff might not be interested in it themselves. Plus, it takes investment to do trainings, both financial and in time wise. And even if training the staff is not the way to go, finding the right talent is also complicated as there is still very little experienced talent out there who has 3D skills, but also experience in the traditional fashion industry and sort of can combine them together. And on top of that, since it is a new technology, there is lack of experience and know-how. How to exactly implement this technology in the business processes. And also, there is no one perfect solution as each business has unique systems and workflows in place. So they cannot all just implement sort of one solution. Right, so let's move on and see how we can take the 3D designs further from product development. Well, the easiest way, of course, is to simply use renders on the website. And this in here was a former client, and because of the nature of their products, 3D was a great solution to be used in the social media and websites. They, for example, also had a 360 video on the website. Another example is also a former client who had a lot of variety in their products, but in essence, they were simple products. Here, you can see in the black boxes there are the real photographs, and then the 3D renders are next to it. So they use 3D visuals in their brochures to make it look more professional and also to be able to visualize all of their colorways faster. This was a uniform manufacturer that had even more variety in their products. Each product had 15 or even more graphic options, which made it impossible to photograph each and every single product. But they still wanted to display all of their options and also provide fast previews for of the custom products for their clients. So 3D was really their only solution. And also, here is an example of what AI could do. As I mentioned, avatars are very problematic until now, but recently, with the help of AI, we can also solve that problem. So, we can use 3D garments in customer facing areas already much more effectively. I also wanted to talk a bit more about visual showrooms, as I personally really believe in it. Why use bland and boring 2D websites where you just scroll on a white background when we could have this kind of website instead? Um, Here you could walk around as in real life. Also, the statistics show how much these virtual showrooms appeal to the customers. So instead of the average 2 minutes per visit, they spend 15 minutes in a virtual showroom, and this is quite something. However, these showrooms are effective mostly for brands with a strong story and a rather smaller amount of SKUs. Simply because, similarly to a real store, products do take room, and in a virtual showroom, it is really all about the visual experience, right? So I would predict that soon we will see more and more of these kind of 3D websites used by brands. But big retailers, I would say they would keep their 2D stores and maybe might have some campaigns here and there with these showrooms and experiences. But beyond simple images and virtual showrooms, what else can be done with 3D marketing? Well, we have already seen some projects here and there. You might remember that Louis Vuitton experimented with AR games, and as I mentioned in the beginning, there have been some projects also with NFTs. These tools are all great way to enhance brand loyalty by creating simply new mediums for exclusive offers and collectible items. We have also seen that Metaverse can offer an additional medium for brands and in order to find new audiences. And even though we have seen a massive decline in the Metaverse visitors recently, the question is still up in the air. Will we shop in the Metaverse in the future? I guess we can only wait and see. But I personally don't think it will happen in the nearest future. And once again, let's discuss the pros and cons. First, 3D can offer a faster way to create product visuals, but it highly depends on the complexity of the product. If we're talking about brands with simple products such as sportswear and so, also these examples that I showed you, then the difference is very significant. But if talking, for example, of wedding gowns, then creating the 3D model of it will take a long time. And in this case, using 3D might not even be the effective way for the business at all. But as physical samples are required for the product imagery, then with using 3D, we can also see a decline in waste and resources and not only material, but we can, if we think about how much electricity and other resources photography sessions require, then we can understand the cut in the environmental costs better as well. Also, again, when products are not too complex, 3D becomes much cheaper. So, for example, when considering the cost of models and the studio and the photographer, editing, and so on, and then just getting a picture of an average outfit can be 70% cheaper with 3D. And lastly, new mediums like virtual showrooms, metaverse, and AR are additional ways to communicate the brand and also create eye catching and attention grabbing campaigns. Now, the obstacles are again mainly regarding the people needed to be involved in it. So, the obstacles today, basically in marketing, are also the same as in product development. Though, as you notice, none of these obstacles are something that will not or cannot be solved. So, just more time is required for the technologies to really settle in. Now, lastly, let's take a look at opportunities for designers and creators as well. So, when you are only learning fashion and design today, 3D is a great tool to use and to understand patterns and functionality of the garments. It's kind of a safe place for you to learn and test your designs, but also maybe start creating your portfolio. So instead of having sketches in your portfolio, using 3D not only makes your portfolio much more professional, but also shows that you understand functionality as a designer. And today, when trying to find a new job in fashion, 3D can add extra plus points and help you stay competitive. All executives in fashion that I've talked to that have experience in established fashion brands say the same thing. They are looking for talents that understand how 3D works and understand how it can be implemented in the business processes and can follow their current workflow in the business itself. Or you can even start a whole new career as I did. Talent in 3D is in demand, so if you enjoy it, it's a great opportunity for you. And on top of everything, you can be part of the biggest movement we've seen recently in fashion, the digital transformation. But what else can you do today as a digital creator in fashion? Well, there are lots of mediums out there for you to display and even monetize your designs, like DressX and The Fabricant, which are all both digital fashion marketplaces. And you can truly unleash your creativity with 3D there. There is literally no limits in 3D, not even physics, if you want to. Also, you can create fashion items for metaverse platforms and be part of the creator communities there. And again, we can only wait and see if it will become the prevailing choice to wear designs and express ourselves in social media. So, lastly, I want to emphasize also more how 3D technologies can promote environmental sustainability. First, the most obvious is what we talked about already. The use of digital sampling reduces significantly the carbon footprint of a business, mainly in regards to the materials and logistics. Secondly, 3D offers an easier way to customize products, and that in turn increases the value of a garment. So, let's say, for example, you're buying a t shirt and you can add a graphic on it that you like, or just customize the colors as you want. And it is all instantly visualized with the help of a 3D customizer. We've seen it for shoes, for example. But then eventually, this garment or this shoe has a lot more value for you compared to another t shirt or another shoe that you didn't customize yourself. So, increasing the value of something in the eyes of a customer is one of the ways to increase the lifespan of a product. And with that, we can tackle the amount of textile waste. Another way to tackle the textile waste is by managing the massive overproduction in fashion. And that we can also do with the help of 3D visuals, which we can use to predict market demand. As you know, 3D visuals can be created way before even the first physical sample, and therefore we can test the market without even producing any physical products. Another thing we already went through is the power of data and how much can 3D twins contribute to the amount of measurable data in a business. Even more, when 3D is used strategically throughout the business, new business models can be born, or some existing models can be now scalable. So, for example, made to order business model, which in its essence is a sustainable business model when used correctly. It can be improved and scaled with simply using 3D visuals before production, or also by using 3D body scanning, for example, and so on. We also touched upon some fully digital business models like DressX, where you can sell clothing without any material resources. Though here it is important to note that electricity needs to be still considered as the main contributor to the carbon footprint of any digital business. We cannot forget that. But digital can be also used together with sort of physical products, creating what's called a phygital business. That means physical and digital combined. For example, an NFT can be sold together with a physical product, creating a connection between the digital and physical. There are actually myriad of ways how different strategies in the digital and physical businesses can be combined, and this can create all kinds of new business models.